Imagine you install like the most advanced, state-of-the-art security system in your home.
Okay.
We are talking motion sensors, laser grids, retinal scanners, the works.
Right, the whole 9 yards?
Exactly. You feel incredibly safe. It's designed to keep out elite thieves. But then, one day, a totally harmless speck of dust just floats past the sensor,
Uh-oh.
right? Your multi-million-dollar security system analyzes this speck of dust and decides that the most logical, measured response is to just completely blow up the house.
Yeah, it's a catastrophic self-inflicted overreaction. I mean, it does vastly more damage to the house than the dust ever could.
And that is essentially what is happening inside your body when you have an allergy. Welcome to the deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
So whether you are a medical student prepping for boards, a veterinary student trying to grasp cross-species reactions, or just, someone endlessly curious about the human body, you're in the right place.
Absolutely.
Our mission today is to explore the complex, sometimes overzealous world of allergic reactions and immunology. We are pulling from academic immunological texts and some really fascinating clinical case studies to break all this down.
Yeah, the mechanisms of hypersensitivity. It's wild stuff.
It really is. Okay, let's unpack this. We throw the word allergy around constantly, right? But on a biological level, what is actually happening when our immune system declares war on a piece of pollen?
Well, to really grasp that, we have to look at how the immune system classifies threats in the first place.
Right.
In clinical immunology, an allergen is technically an antigen.
And an antigen is just anything that makes your body produce antibodies.
Exactly. Any substance at all. But an allergen is a very specific and somewhat tragic type of antigen.
Tragic.
Because it's entirely non-infectious. It's foreign to the body, sure, but it doesn't replicate like a virus. It doesn't secrete toxins like a bacteria.
It's just there.
Right. Under normal circumstances, it is completely harmless. For the general population, inhaling this protein produces absolutely no reaction.
But for people with allergies.
Yeah, in predisposed individuals, for reasons we are still mapping out, it triggers a highly specific, highly destructive adaptive immune response.
So the body basically treats a peanut or like a microscopic dust mite as if it were a deadly pathogen.
Totally. The immune system is essentially hallucinating a massive threat.
Wow. But what's truly wild about this biological misfire is that the explosion of symptoms, the hives, the anaphylaxis,
The asthma, yeah.
right, never happens the very first time you encounter the allergen.
That is the absolute foundation of allergy medicine, actually.
Right, there's a hidden timeline.
Exactly. Allergic reactions do not happen in one step. They require a two-step mechanism. The first step is the sensitization phase.
Okay, so that's the very first contact.
Right. When that pollen enters the body for the very first time, your tissues catabolize it. They break it down and clear it away rapidly.
Without any symptom.
Without any inflammation at all, you wouldn't even know it happened. You might eat a strawberry or pet a cat and feel absolutely fine.
But the immune system is, like, paying attention to the background. It doesn't just forget.
Oh, far from it. It's quietly taking notes on the molecular structure of that protein. It registers this foreign entity and starts producing specialized weapons against it.
And these weapons are antibodies.
Specifically, a class of antibodies called immunoglobulin E, or IgE.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And once produced, these IgE antibodies travel through your bloodstream and attach themselves to the surface of mast cells.
Mast cells, where are those?
They're heavy-duty immune cells embedded deep in your tissues, your skin, your lungs, your gut. Once those antibodies anchor onto the mast cells, the trap is set.
Okay.
And that brings us to the second step, which is the state phase. Some people call it the reactive phase.
Okay, so if we think about this chronologically, the sensitization phase is like the police taking a mugshot of a suspect, logging their fingerprints into the database, and then quietly letting them go back out onto the street. I like that. The suspect thinks they got away with it. But the state phase is the SWAT team kicking down the door the absolute second that suspect is spotted in the neighborhood again.
That is a brilliant way to visualize it.
Yeah.
If that sensitized individual is re-exposed to that exact same allergen months or even years later, it binds immediately to those IgE antibodies waiting on the mast cells.
And that's the tripwire?
Exactly. This cross-linking acts as a tripwire. It triggers an explosive inflammatory response. The mast cells undergo this violent process called degranulation.
Degranulation? That sounds intense.
It is. They dump highly potent chemical mediators right into into the surrounding tissue. That rapid chemical dump is what causes the sudden sneezing, the severe swelling, or, systemic anaphylaxis.
Which makes me wonder, why does the body employ this two-step process in the first place?
What?
I mean, if the immune system is so smart, why not just attack the suspect the very first time it enters the body? Why allow that silent exposure to set a trap?
So it really comes down to the fundamental difference between your innate and adaptive immune systems.
Okay. The innate system is your blunt instrument. It attacks anything vaguely foreign right away, but it's not very efficient.
Right.
But the adaptive immune system, which drives allergies, is based entirely on memory and incredible specificity. It needs a blueprint to build a custom weapon.
Ah, so it takes time.
A lot of time. It takes significant biological energy to manufacture IgE antibodies perfectly tailored to the molecular shape of that specific pollen grain.
And then it has to distribute those antibodies all over the body.
Exactly. So that silent first exposure isn't a failure to act. It's just the necessary manufacturing period for a highly customized defense network.
So the body is spending all this energy building a bespoke weapon system for a threat that doesn't actually exist.
Yeah, pretty much.
That completely explains the classic rapid-fire allergy attack we usually think of. But the immune system actually has a broad spectrum of ways it can misfire.
Oh, definitely. It isn't just limited to IgE antibodies and mast cells.
Right, because there's a whole classification system. Yeah. The clinical framework we use is called the Gellin-Coombs classification. It divides hypersensitivity into 4 distinct mechanisms.
Based on what exactly?
Based on which specific components of the immune system are involved and the timeline of the reaction.
Okay, so type I is the immediate hypersensitivity we just broke down. The SWAT team.
Exactly. IgE antibodies, mast cells, and it happens incredibly fast, usually within minutes.
But what happens if the immune system decides that your own internal cells are the intruders?
That's where we enter type 2, or cytotoxic hypersensitivity.
Cytotoxic.
Yeah. This mechanism abandons Ig entirely. Instead, it involves IgG, or IgM antibodies.
And the timeline.
It shifts from minutes to hours. In type 2, your antibodies mistakenly target antigens that are physically attached to the surfaces of your own native cells.
So it's attacking your own body.
Right. When the antibodies bind to your cells, they act like a homing beacon for destructive enzymes leading to cytolysis.
Which means?
Literally the rupturing and death of the cell.
Well,
A devastating clinical example is hemolytic disease of the newborn.
I've heard of that.
Yeah, it's where a mother's immune system produces antibodies that cross the placenta and actively destroy the red blood cells of her own developing fetus.
That is a terrifying shift from an environmental overreaction to a direct attack on native tissue.
It really is.
And then type 3 shifts the battlefield yet again, right? Instead of attacking a cell surface, type 3 is the immune complex mediated reaction.
You've got it. In type 3, you still have those IgG or IgM antibodies, but they are reacting to soluble antigens.
Soluble meaning they're just floating around.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Proteins just freely floating in the bloodstream. The antibodies bind to these floating proteins and form these dense, tangled webs called immune complexes.
Okay, so these clumps of antibodies and proteins.
Right. And normally, the body's natural waste disposal systems clear these webs out of the blood. But if there are too many of them, or they're the wrong size,
They get stuck.
they bypass the disposal system and get physically stuck in the body's microscopic filtering networks.
Like what?
The tiny blood vessels, the synovial fluid in your joints, or the delicate filters in your kidneys.
They essentially clog the plumbing.
Perfect analogy, yeah.
And when they get stuck, they trigger massive localized inflammation as the immune system tries to blast them out of the tissue. I think a farmer's lung is a classic example of this.
Oh, great example.
Yeah, a farmer inhales microscopic mold spores from damp hay over and over. Antibodies bind to those spores in the bloodstream, form these massive webs, and those webs get trapped in the microscopic capillaries of the lungs.
Causing hours of intense, agonizing respiratory inflammation.
Right. So it's a localized, highly destructive response to those deposited webs.
Yep. And that brings us to the final category, type 5, delayed hypersensitivity. And this one fundamentally rewrites the rules.
Because it throws out the concept of antibodies completely, doesn't it?
Exactly. Type 5 is strictly cell-mediated. It relies heavily on T lymphocytes.
The T cells.
Right. They are the specialized infantry of the immune system. Because this reaction requires these T cells to physically recognize the antigen, become activated, and then travel through the body to the site of exposure, it operates on a massive delay.
So we are talking days instead of minutes.
Days to develop a reaction, yeah. rather than the minutes of type 1 or the hours of types 2 and 3.
You know, looking at this spectrum, from custom antibodies triggering chemical bombs in minutes, to webs clogging up blood vessels, to direct cell-to-cell combat taking days,
This is diverse, right?
it really highlights how the immune system evolved to fight vastly different classes of pathogens. Like IgE is structurally perfect for targeting large extracellular parasites,
Right.
while T cells are assassins designed to hunt down intracellular threats like hiding viruses.
Exactly. The tragedy of hypersensitivity is that the body is deploying these highly specialized, devastating military branches against totally inappropriate targets.
It is the ultimate case of mistaken identity, backed by a biological military-industrial complex.
I love that phrasing. Very accurate.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to zoom in heavily on type I.
The immediate IgE-driven reaction.
Yeah, because it's the one most listeners are dealing with on a daily basis. The seasonal sniffles, the pet dander asthma, the peanut
Some are
allergies.
common ones, yeah.
How exactly does this rapid response unit function on a cellular level? Like, who is giving the orders to build these IgE weapons?
So the generals of this operation are a specific subset of T cells called Th2 lymphocytes.
Th2.
Right. During that initial silent sensitization phase we discuss, these Th2 cells are the ones that recognize the harmless allergen and decide it's a threat. Once they make that decision, they begin secreting specific communication proteins called cytokines. The key messengers here are interleukin-4 and interleukin-13.
IL-4 and IL-13. So these cytokines are essentially text messages sent to the rest of the immune system.
Yes, and those text messages are directed specifically at the B lymphocytes. The cytokines instruct the B cells to undergo a massive factory retooling.
To start mass producing the IgE antibodies.
Exactly. Tailored exclusively to that specific allergen.
Okay, so fast forward to the state phase. You inhale the allergen again.
Right.
It cross-links the IgE on the mast cell. The mast cell violently degranulates. But what does that actually mean for the surrounding tissue?
Well, the most famous chemical released is histamine.
Histamine, of course.
Histamine physically forces your blood vessels to dilate and become leaky. The physiological goal is to allow more immune cells to rush into the tissue to fight the invader.
But the side effect of that leaky plumbing is that fluid rushes into the tissue, which is why your nasal passages swell shut, your eyes get red and puffy.
And your body starts overproducing mucus to try and trap the non-existent threat.
Wow.
And that is just the immediate reaction. The degranulation also kicks off a second, more prolonged wave.
A second way.
Yeah. The initial histamine dump was just stuff the mast cell already had stored up in little biological packets. But the activation of the cell also forces it to start synthesizing brand new inflammatory mediators from scratch.
Oh, so it's making new weapons on the fly.
Specifically lipid-derived molecules called leukotrienes and prostaglandins. Because the cell has to manufacture these on the spot, this creates a late-phase reaction.
How late are we talking?
Your symptoms might peak initially, seem to fade, and then roar back 6 to 9 hours later as these newly minted chemicals recruit even more inflammatory cells to the site.
That sounds miserable. So let's talk about the usual suspects that trigger this cascade. The allergens themselves.
Sure.
Starting with pollen. When you look at the physical mechanics of pollen, it is no wonder it causes so much human misery.
Pollen grains are the male sex cells of flowering plants, designed by evolution to be carried for miles on the wind. Structurally, they're an absolute nightmare for the human respiratory system.
Because of their size, right?
Yeah, they generally range from 20 to 60 micrometers in diameter.
Which is a devious size. Because if they were larger, the hairs and mucus in your nose would easily trap them before they got far. And if they were smaller, you might just exhale them back out. But 20 to 60 micrometers is just small enough to bypass the upper defenses and just large enough to get wedged perfectly into the deep peripheral airways of your lungs.
It is the optimal size for a biological delivery system. But the proteins that actually cause the allergy aren't on the tough, spiky outer shell of the pollen grain.
They aren't.
No, they are locked inside. When the pollen lands on a wet mucosal surface, like the lining of your nose, your throat, or your conjunctiva, the grain essentially hydrates.
And then it bursts open.
The allergenic proteins diffuse out of the shell, seep into your tissue, and encounter the mast cells.
And in the realm of molecular allergy, we are starting to identify the exact alphanumeric codes of these proteins, right?
We are, yes.
Like in the grass family, the major allergen is a protein called pheolpion-1. In olive tree pollen, which is a massive driver of seasonal asthma, it's ole E1.
That's right.
But why do these random alphanumeric codes actually matter to a medical student or, patient?
Because precision matters in treatment. If an immunologist knows that you aren't just reacting to olive pollen, but specifically to the molecular shape of OLE1,
They can treat it better.
they can theoretically engineer a highly targeted immunotherapy, like a vaccine, designed to desensitize you to that exact molecular structure rather than just telling you to take an antihistamine and stay indoors.
Okay, so that's the great outdoors. Let's move indoors to something significantly more unsettling.
Dust mites.
Gust mites. These are microscopic arachnids, and they absolutely thrive in microclimates of 25 to 30 degrees Celsius with high humidity.
Yep.
Which, unfortunately, is the exact thermodynamic profile of your mattress while you are sleeping in it.
It is their ideal habitat. They live in our bedding, our carpets, our upholstery, and they feed on the millions of dead skin cells that humans and pets shed on a daily basis.
I want to focus on a very specific, incredibly gross detail here, because it fundamentally changes how we view this allergy.
Okay, hit me.
It is commonly said that people who are allergic to dust mites aren't actually allergic to the little bugs themselves. They are allergic to the mite's feces. Is that biological fact or just a gross urban myth?
It is entirely factual.
Oh, man.
The most powerful allergenic proteins are located in the mite's intestinal tract and are excreted in its feces.
Wow.
The most notorious major allergen from the common house dust mite is called DIR-P1.
DIR-P1.
Yes. And what makes DIR-P1 so uniquely potent isn't just its shape. It's the fact that DIR-P1 is a glycoprotein with enzymatic activity.
Enzymatic activity, meaning what?
It is literally a digestive enzyme. When you are sleeping and you inhale microscopic mite feces, that DIR-P1 enzyme lands in your lungs and actively cleaves or breaks down the tight protein junctions that hold the cells of your airway lining together.
That is chemical warfare. It is literally digesting the glue that holds your respiratory barrier intact.
Just so the allergen can penetrate deeper into your tissue and trigger a more violent immune response.
That is horrifying.
It is a phenomenal, if horrifying, biological mechanism. And we see similar misconceptions when it comes to animal dander, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, people constantly talk about being allergic to dog hair or cat hair. But the hair itself is remarkably unallergenic. It's essentially just dead keratin.
So what is the immune system actually reacting to when someone starts wheezing around a cat?
In cats, the major culprit is a protein called FeLD1, and FeLD1 is primarily produced in the cat's salivary glands and sebaceous glands in the skin.
Oh, so think about a cat's daily routine. Because cats are constantly grooming themselves, licking their fur for hours a day.
They're essentially painting themselves in this highly allergenic saliva protein.
Exactly. The saliva dries on the hair, turns into microscopic, incredibly lightweight flakes, and simply falls off into the environment.
FeLD1 is notorious because it is highly aerodynamic and incredibly sticky. It remains suspended in the air for hours, and it binds tightly to dust particles, walls, and clothing.
And dog.
Dogs have a very similar mechanism, though their major allergens are a different class of proteins called lipocalins, most notably CAN-F1.
Understanding that the saliva is the vehicle completely shifts the clinical paradigm, though.
How so?
Well, if a veterinary student or an allergist tells a patient, just vacuum the cat hair off the rug, they are completely missing the source of the problem.
Oh, absolutely.
You have to address the dried saliva that is literally suspended in the ambient air and glued to the curtains. It proves why understanding the molecular origin of the allergen is critical for actually managing the patient's environment.
Exactly. You can vacuum all day, but if the FeLD1 is stuck to the drywall, the patient will still have an asthma attack.
Okay, let's shift gears and look at the other extreme of the hypersensitivity spectrum. We just covered type I, the SWAT team.
Right.
If type I is the rapid response unit, type 5 hypersensitivity is the incredibly slow, heavily bureaucratic committee.
That is a perfect analogy. Type 5e operates on a completely different biological timeline because, as we established, it completely ignores antibodies.
It's all about the cells.
It is purely driven by the physical movement and activation of cells.
Let's extend that bureaucratic committee metaphor to understand how a cell-mediated response actually unfolds in practice. Let's look at contact dermatitis from metal allergies.
A very common one.
Yeah, someone wears a cheap watch strap or a nickel belt buckle, and a few days later their skin breaks out in a blistering rash. How does the metal trigger this?
Metal allergy is fascinating because metals like nickel act as what immunologists call haptens.
Haptens. What's a hapten?
A hapten is essentially half an allergen. It is a molecule that is so physically small The immune system's radar can't actually detect it on its own.
So it's invisible.
By itself, a nickel ion is completely invisible to a T cell.
But as that watch strap rubs against your wrist, the metal slowly dissolves in your sweat and diffuses into the deep layers of your skin.
And that's where the chemistry happens. The metal ions chemically bind to your body's own native carrier proteins. The combination of the foreign metal and the native skin protein creates a brand new mutated structure called a neoantigen.
And suddenly the immune system can see it.
Yes.
This is where the middle managers come in.
Precisely. You have specialized sentinel cells residing in your skin called Langerhans cells. Think of them as the middle managers of the immune system. They patrol the tissue, looking for anomalies. When a Langerhans cell spots this new neoantigen, it grabs it, processes it, and physically leaves the skin.
It just walks away.
It travels all the way through the lymphatic system to the nearest lymph node headquarters. There, it presents this neoantigen paperwork to the executive committee, the T cells. This whole journey constitutes the sensitization phase.
So the lymph node approves the budget, and you now have a localized battalion of memory T cells specifically trained to seek out and destroy nickel-infused skin proteins.
And upon re-exposure, the next time you wear that exact watch strap, the process kicks in again.
But it is slow.
Very slow. Those memory T cells have to recognize the threat, migrate out of the lymph nodes, travel through the bloodstream, and infiltrate the exact site of contact on your wrist.
Do they use histamine?
No, they don't use histamine. Instead, specific Th1 helper cells and CD8 cytotoxic T cells secrete powerful inflammatory cytokines, predominantly interferon gamma and tumor necrosis factor alpha.
And these cytokines slowly recruit a massive influx of destructive macrophages to the area, resulting in localized tissue damage, blistering, and that classic eczematous rash.
Exactly. Because the cellular travel and recruitment takes so much time, the physical symptoms typically peak a full 48 to 72 hours after you put the watch on.
So what does this all mean for the clinician? If I'm a medical student and a patient comes in covered in a red, itchy rash, I can't just look at their tissues under a microscope right then and there to see if it's mast cells or T cells causing the problem.
Right.
How do medical professionals physically distinguish between a rapid type I reaction and a delayed type I reaction in a diagnostic setting?
Your clinical history and the timeline of the symptoms are your first major clues. But to definitively confirm the mechanism, we rely on in vivo testing.
Which means testing on the living body.
Testing the suspected allergens directly on the patient's living skin, yeah.
Let's look at the prick test first, which is the gold standard for type I allergies, like pollen, mite feces, or pet dander.
The prick test is beautifully simple but highly effective because it leverages the localized nature of mast cells. A single drop of a standardized, purified liquid allergen is placed on the inside of the patient's forearm.
Okay.
The clinician then takes a small lancet and lightly pricks the skin directly through the drop of liquid.
So you are intentionally pushing the allergen down into the dermis.
Exactly, because the dermis is where the highest concentration of mast cells reside.
Right.
If that patient was previously sensitized, the IgE antibodies sitting on those local mast cells will instantly bind the allergen and trigger immediate degranulation.
And because it is a type I reaction, we can read the results in just 15 to 20 minutes.
Yeah, very fast.
And visually, you are looking for a wheal and flare response. A raised pale bump, which is the wheal, surrounded by a spreading red ring of erythema, the flare.
Exactly.
And this visual marker directly ties back to what we discussed earlier about histamine. The histamine release causes the local blood vessels to dilate, making the area red.
And it makes the vessels leaky, allowing fluid to pool under the skin, creating the pale bump.
It is a real-time visualization of leaky plumbing.
It is a perfect microreaction. But the critical role of prick testing is that you cannot just test the suspected allergen. You absolutely must run controls.
Why is that?
Human skin reactivity varies wildly. We always apply a drop of pure histamine as a positive control. Histamine bypasses the allergy pathway entirely and directly attacks the vessel, so it should always cause a wheal and flare.
And if it doesn't?
If the patient has no reaction to pure histamine, it usually means they are secretly taking antihistamines and the entire test is clinically invalid.
That makes sense. And conversely, use a drop of plain saline as a negative control, which should cause absolutely zero reaction.
Right.
If the patient breaks out in a bump from plain salt water, it means they have hyperreactive skin, and you can't trust any of the positive allergen results either.
Exactly. It is rigorous diagnostic logic. Contrast that rapid prick test with the patch test, which is the tool of choice for delayed Type 4, cell-mediated allergies like the metal watch strap.
Right, because type 4 requires days for T cells to migrate. You can't just prick the skin and stare at it for 20 minutes.
For a patch test or epicutaneous test, diluted potential allergens are placed inside little aluminum chambers, which are then taped securely to the patient's back.
And the patient has to leave them there for a full 48 hours.
2 entire days of wearing tiny metal cups taped to your spine, yes.
Wow.
The physiological goal is to give the chemical time to diffuse through the epidermal barrier, bind to carrier proteins, form those neoantigens, and trigger the migration of memory T cells from the lymph nodes back to the skin.
Okay, so the tape is removed at the 48-hour mark.
And the clinician performs the first reading, looking for localized eczematous inflammation under the cups.
But there is a crucial nuance here. You don't just read it at 48 hours and send the patient home. The diagnostic protocol requires a two-step reading process.
Right.
You evaluate at day 2, but then you have to bring the patient back and read the skin again at day 4. Why wait an additional 48 hours to make a diagnosis?
This is a vital piece of diagnostic detective work. When you tape harsh chemicals and metal cups tightly against someone's skin for 2 days, you might cause a simple, non-allergic contact irritation.
Oh, just from the friction and occlusion.
The skin gets angry just from being smothered. To distinguish between a true T-cell-driven allergic eczema and simple, localized irritation, you wait another 48 hours.
Ah.
By day 4, a simple irritant reaction will have begun to fade because the physical stressor was removed. But a true allergic reaction will persist or often become significantly worse because the inflammatory cytokine cascade initiated by the T cells is still actively raging in the tissue.
That perfectly illustrates the delayed nature of the mechanism. Wow. We've covered an immense amount of ground today.
You really have.
We journeyed from that first silent sensitization phase, where the immune system quietly drafts a blueprint, to the traumatic, explosive state phase. We unpacked the profound physiological differences between the immediate antibody-driven type I reactions.
With our cast of enzyme-rich mite feces, perfectly sized pollen grains, and aerodynamic cat saliva.
Right, and the slow, smoldering, T-cell-driven type 5 reactions that turn our own skin proteins into microscopic Frankenstein monsters.
It is a profound testament to the staggering complexity and sheer destructive power of the human immune response.
Absolutely.
But it also leaves us with a final provocative thought to ponder. As you continue your studies or just go about your day, think about this.
Okay.
The immune system is a phenomenally sophisticated defense network. It evolved over millions of years of brutal natural selection to fight off deadly, rapidly replicating viruses and tissue-destroying parasites.
True.
Yet it uses these exact same devastating, tissue-damaging weapons to fight completely harmless proteins, a microscopic grain of olive pollen or the nickel backing of a watch strap.
It begs a massive question for you to explore.
What is the evolutionary trade-off here? Why does a survival mechanism so advanced, so highly calibrated, possess such a volatile and sometimes self-destructive blind spot?
Why do we keep paying for a security system that blows up the house? It is a fascinating biological mystery. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the amazing, sometimes baffling complexities of the human body. We'll see you next time.